Hello, everyone, and welcome to this discussion for the Economist Innovation at Work US series. Our conversation today focuses on digital transformation at work and is titled Avoiding the Pitfalls of Workforce Planning. How can data be used to answer the big questions at work? My name is Shivangi Jain, and I'm a research manager and economist at Economist Impact. And I'm very excited to be moderating today what should be a fascinating discussion. To begin with, I'd like to say a big hello to everyone listening in. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoy this discussion and gain some insightful takeaways. So, what are we talking about today? Well, in the past, using and understanding people data has always been the role and remit of human resource functions within organizations. But a new future of work is emerging. There is wide recognition that people-related issues are a business-wide concern, and all parts of a business need to think about workforce planning, and they need to be ensuring that they can attract and retain talent. So today we'll be talking about what strategic workforce planning looks like in the context of the post-pandemic recovery, and also the pitfalls for businesses to avoid. With the shifts that we're starting to see in how and where people want to work, we'll also discuss the types of provisions businesses need to start considering for the contingent workforce. Joining me today over the next 45 minutes or so, I have a wonderful and diverse panel that I'm very excited to introduce you to. So with me today, I have Alessandro Ventura, Chief Information Officer and Vice President, Analytics and Business Services for North America at Unilever. Joanne Stonier, Chief Data Officer at MasterCard. Tyler Weeks, Vice President, Talent Analytics at Marriott International. Nellie Hyatt, Head of Strategy and Podcast Host, Workplace Transformation. And last but not least, we have Michelle Neely-Scollis, Senior Vice President, People Partner at Zendesk. A warm welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for joining me today. So just to begin this discussion, I'd like to just start off by setting the scene for our audience and defining what we mean by good business analytics in the context of workforce planning. So if I could just come to each of you in turn, Ali, maybe starting with you, what would you define as good analytics, and what does it allow you to do as a business?
Thank you, Shivangi, and good day, everybody. I think good analytics is something that is a capability that helps businesses spotting the hidden gems. So not just confirming what the trends that companies see and what they're doing, but finding really getting to know about things, getting for Unilever, for our area in the consumer goods sector, it's about understanding more about a new brand that is coming up. Who are the consumer that buy it? What else do they buy? What segments are these consumer associated? So it's about answering a certain curiosity to discover new things.
Thanks so much, Ali. Maybe Tyler, just coming to you next. So Ali alluded to the fact that analytics can essentially enable better decision making by identifying what he called as these hidden gems. What do you think about that, and what would you define as good business analytics?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy to kind of get distracted when you think about business analytics to start thinking immediately about dashboards or about reports or about, some of the outputs from a team that traditionally does business analytics. However, the way I talk to my teams is I usually have them focus on the decisions. I say that our product is the decisions. It's not the dashboards or the data. And so really starting from there, in fact, every engagement that we take internally, we focus on what's the decision that's being made and how do we help you make it. And it may not be that you need a very sophisticated analysis or you need data science. It may just be a few very simple points of information that help you be confident in that decision. And if that's all it is, then great. Then we move on to the next problem. But really, that focus on decisions, I think, is really where business analytics shines.
Absolutely. Nellie, just building on what Tyler said, do you have a view on what that right data might look like to perform the right analytics, and also help businesses make those right decisions that Tyler was talking about?
Yeah, I love the point that Tyler brought, but with my in my work with different clients, very big, large corporation and small, what I've identified at Goose Business Analytics is when there's an owner. Without an owner, even the best business analytics are useless. So really having a champion that has been appointed by the leadership team will make all the difference. Then obviously what we're looking at and the goal and the purpose of this data that we want to measure will be impactful. But without a champion that has been appointed by the leadership team, it's going nowhere. So having a consensus among the leadership team on that data and what we want to do with the data, and having a champion that help making progress on that thing that we want to improve really is what can bring impact to a business.
That's a really interesting point, Nellie. Thank you for raising that around having a champion and the importance of that to actually use data in the right way and make sure that we're collecting the right data and using it the way we should be. Joanne, maybe just coming to you next. What do you think of what everyone has been said, and what would you define as good business analytics?
So I appreciate what everyone has said. I think for me and for my firm, I would tie business analytics data analytics is only as good as your business strategy and how data analytics supports that. So while I appreciate you need a champion, I would say you need several champions to understand, as others have said, what you want to measure and what you're really trying to achieve. And so in the area of workforce, as we're discussing today, I think what we've started to do is look at the employee life cycle differently and try to understand the data that we need in order to really understand our employees and potential employees differently. So we're looking at talent in a different way, right? We're trying to understand from an analytic perspective, how do we look at skill sets? How do we look at what makes employees want to stay at a firm or firms like ours? What are the ways to really look at the next generations of talent? And what are the skills that we really all need to improve upon, including analytics, that I think has to become part and parcel of how the next generation of the workforce has to start thinking. So for me, analytics is kind of the next generation skill set that a lot of employees are beginning to use, no matter where they are in a firm, whether they're in marketing or HR, or whether they're in a product design position, or even in sales. All employees are beginning to use business analytics. It's just, what problem are they trying to solve, as Tyler said, and Ali said, and Nellie said. So I think we're all in agreement on that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a really interesting way of looking at it. It's looking at it from the end goal. What is the end goal of what we're trying to achieve with the data, rather than starting with the data and then trying to sort of backwards engineer what it's trying to tell us.
And the data always
Michelle,
tells you
sorry,
something.
go.
I'm sorry. And the data
Absolutely.
always tells you something, right? But is it what you're trying to solve is the important thing.
Absolutely. And like you said, aligning it with that strategy that you set out at the outset. Michelle, maybe coming to you next on your thoughts, just in terms of what everyone else has said, what do you think good analytics looks like, particularly in the context of workforce planning?
Yeah, so I will only add to some comments that Joanne made. And I think in everyone's context, it could be a different answer, but the core of it is data that provides insights, that drives decisions, that supports anybody's vision or strategy for the company. And my mind as well, I think Joanne just nailed it. In the context that we are all working in today, with our workforce being digital and remote, access to data not only helps leaders make decisions, but it also helps them stay connected and understand where their workforce is, where they're going, and when there's opportunities. And you guys all know in the last 2 years, we have had significant situations where not being in a space we've had to use data and analytics to understand what's going on with our workforce. So I think it's paramount today, again, not only from a company, the macro perspective, but from a people manager perspective. And any leader running large organizations, if they don't know how to use workforce analytics, I think they're going to be one-footed on it as we move forward.
Absolutely, Michelle. And I actually want to pick up on one of the points you raised around the challenges that businesses are facing and how sort of good analytics can help support that. And I guess one of the challenges that that a lot of businesses are facing today is around talent shortages. So we talked a lot about what business analytics is and how it can be used generally. But in terms of specifically dealing with talent shortages, is this also something that good analytics can support with, and if so, how? Maybe Michelle,
Yes.
just carrying on with you, what do you think about that?
Yes, for sure. If I put on my total, if I think about our recruiting team, they have to use data today to know where our talent is migrated around the world for those core skill sets. It's through that data that they inform our leaders when we're looking at our strategy, new product evolution, and what skills that we need. We go to them to ask them, the talent acquisition team, like, where is this skill set around the world? With that data, we can look at our location strategy, we can understand the migration, and because we're remote first at Zendesk, it allows us as well to work with our real estate team to understand, do we need to have collaboration centers in new areas? So it all starts from data, but the data is driven by the strategy of the company, our product, and making sure we understand where talent is migrating to and from.
Absolutely. And it reiterates the point that Joanne was making earlier as well, that it starts with the strategy and the data supports that strategy. Nelly, what about you? What would you say about using data to manage talent shortages? How can businesses do that?
Yeah, I think I really appreciate Michelle's answer. And for me, what I've witnessed is that there's not one size fits all. And I think Michelle was really encompasses a lot of different use cases. Uh, Company can have a problem or a challenge based on very varied reasons. So really looking at data and understanding like are we where is the gap internally and where our competitors or even our peers are succeeding, and understanding the data. So I think what I appreciate in the work that we have today, as many people have mentioned, is that we collect a lot of data internally, but we can tap also in data externally to understand where are we in this world, what is the context around us that can also provide some insight into the gaps that we have and that we want to fill.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nelly. Ali, just thinking about it from the perspective of Unilever, is this a challenge that you've seen come across as well, in terms of talent shortages? And how is Unilever sort of approaching that using data analytics?
Yeah, so 100% and at all level. What I would say is there are also external macro forces that influence the process. So in my view, basically, we need to look at our digital transformation process, because the digital transformation process is changing the nature of the skills that we need. So it would be a big mistake for companies to take, you know, the skill set that we need today and think that we will need the same skills in 10 years, because the work is changing. Joanne was making the point of basically you need business analytics everywhere. And if I look at, I started this job in a slightly different capacity, but in this geography 5 years ago, and how the work of salespeople is changing, how much more dependent on the reading of data it is. So I think that there is, we need to combine digital workforce planning with the digital transformation processes, as well as with our forecast processes. everybody says there's going to be a recession in 2023. And so, if you look at more a quantitative part of your population around factory production lines, distribution center employee, et cetera, this is heavily dependent also on what's going to be the forecast and what are going to be the volume that we're going to move, in the next couple of years. So I think the important thing is about combining, what we know about today around skills with how these skills are moving. And this is the attempt we're trying to do at Unilever as well. I don't think anybody has cracked it. Certainly we haven't. And we are at the infancy of the of this process. But it would be a really bad mistake to look at workforce planning as a static tool.
I think you raised some really interesting points there, Ali. I think strategic workforce planning, as you mentioned, is not really just about the head count. It's not just about the numbers of people, but it's about whether you have the right skills and also having that foresight to plan ahead and kind of know what's coming, both in terms of the skills that you might require, but also across the broader kind of economic context and what that might mean for your business. Joanne, maybe if I could come to you next, and just thinking about how businesses start to kind of build that foresight and work that through in their workforce planning. So whether that be in terms of the skills that they might need in the future, or how wider whatever is happening globally might affect them as a business. How can businesses start to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an art and a science to doing it. And I think all of us are probably on a journey to doing it. I think that we talk about human resources, right, and as people, but they require an understanding, as Ali said, of the talent and skills. So I think organizations are getting better and better at looking at positions from a skills assessment perspective to say what type of skills are needed in different jobs, so that you can then use that data to also then look at what I will call the data life cycle of an employee, right? Because your employees can also move around to different positions if you understand their skills and where the jobs are moving, right? So there's opportunity also to upskill or change skills of your current employee base. It also tells you how the jobs are changing in your organization. And many of us have seen those changes over the past couple of years. As the workforce has become increasingly remote, it means we are increasingly digital, and we've talked about the increased need for analytics. So as we see our employees' skills changing, it also tells us, well, we need to then grow a pipeline of skills, right? We want also a commitment to a diverse workforce. For MasterCard, it's a global workforce. Ali mentioned you also need to plan that in conjunction with your business planning, right? So financially, we do a financial budget. I think your HR or human resource budget, we also talk about it as people and capabilities at MasterCard. How do you think about that in conjunction with where your business is going? So what's your talent pipeline look like? And that talent pipeline is both people that you need to attract and grow as your business is growing, but also what are you doing to grow the talent within your organization? What are those career moves that you need to make, right? What's the succession planning inside your organization? Because we know we're going to lose some people, right? And so how are you going to fill those gaps as you lose people? Do you have the right progression? So I think there's a science to this. There's a data science, as we all will talk about, and an analytic science. But there's also some art to this, right? Because we're talking about people, their preferences, what they want to be doing, what career paths they want. And so I think that that's all part and parcel of looking at it from an analytic perspective, but then really deploying it in a very, very humane and personal way, because that's what makes people stay with organizations, when they feel that an organization's culture fits them, but also that an organization has invested in them, right? And I think that goes to then people staying with an organization and not having that problem of losing employees and having to have the constant recruiting challenge, which, look, I think we're all going to still have, because I think we're just in a fluid moment in time, that there's a lot of opportunity due to the remote nature of work for people to try different things. And I think we're going to be in that for a little while. even with the recession that Ollie mentioned as a possibility. I hope that helps.
Absolutely. I think that's a really way of looking at it, that it's a combination of an art and a science. So you have the data science bit, which is looking at, essentially, it's looking at historical data, right? You're looking at what's happened in the past and using that to kind of understand what might happen going forward. But then, of course, something like COVID happened that none of us could have predicted, that data science would have never told us. And that's where the art kind of comes into it, plus all of the other foresight planning that comes in. Tyler, if I could just come to you, thinking about it from the hospitality industry context, what does that workforce planning sort of look like in that context, building on what Joanne was saying?
Well, if I could answer that, I'd be doing all right. Look, I think for no matter what domain you're in, or what industry you're supporting, I have maybe a little bit different view on workforce planning, and I'm actually going to go back to something Joanne said at the very beginning, around kind of focusing on where you need to get to. And I think so much of the conversation about workforce planning has been dominated by skills, like just conversations around skills, around competencies, around defining roles. The place that I'm really focusing, or that I really kind of center on, is what do I actually need to produce? What is the thing? What's the output that needs to come out? And then work our way backwards, because that's a thing that you can plan for. Like, what is somewhere in your company's strategy is going to be a thing that you're going to want to do. You currently do X, and someday you want to produce product Y. Well, if I walk backwards from that, one of the hardest things, I'll just say, that like any company has of any size, it doesn't even matter how small you are. Like, you could be 50 people. Answering the question of how many people do I have that could develop a website is a really hard question to answer. Most companies can give an answer that's sort of like, there's a lot of taxis in New York, right? They'll do it based on like the name of an organization or some job titles, but knowing who knows how to do that thing, so you know how much capacity you have for that output, is actually very hard. If you can solve that, if you can get at the root of how many people do I have that know how to do a thing, then you can start to plan for the future. Well, what do we need to put out? Do we need more people that know how to X? I don't think there's this thing out there that we'll find that's like the skill of the future, because it's going to be different for every company. It's not like, you're a software company 15 years ago and HTML5 is coming down the pike, and so like, let's get everybody ramped up on a new programming language. It's a bit more complex than that. So I think that lends itself to opportunities to actually start to look more at the jobs themselves and go, okay, well, historically this was 2 or 3 jobs, but really, can I combine these into one? Can I broaden people's skill sets by having them do more than one thing that traditionally were siloed? And now I've got more capacity for that work. Does that make sense?
It does. And just sticking with you for a second, Tyler, I think that's a really interesting way to look at it. But I guess my question would be, to what extent does data and analytics allow you to sort of make those decisions? Versus going back to what Joanne was, how much of it is more of an art and more about understanding business, knowing how it kind of operates, and using that insight to kind of get to those answers.
Well, I love what Joanne said, because there's another piece of this that really sort of frustrates me in sort of talking about workforce planning, where we talk about it like a supply and demand problem. Like, I need people that can do this, and there's roles where I need them to do it. The problem is that people aren't aluminum. They care about what them wanting to do it is important. So if you ran an assessment in a company, you might find that something like 90% of the company is qualified to be a delivery driver. That doesn't mean that that's your supply of that skill, because they've got to want to do it too. And that makes people really complex. It's why I love my job, because they're very they're very squirrely, and sometimes it might be better for them, but people don't always operate in their best interests. So you've really got to understand interest, ability, and opportunity within your company. And that interest piece is the part that eludes many of us. And we go dig through like HCM or HRIS data trying to figure out what people want, but we're not actually asking them in most cases, or sort of really going and doing some real sensing in the org.
That's really interesting. Michelle, maybe if I could come to you just to get your perspective as well from Zendesk. Is that similar to how you would approach workforce planning at Zendesk, or is there other considerations that would feed into that beyond what Tyler has mentioned?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things here for me. When we talk about workforce planning, there's normally, yes, strategy and budget. Absolutely, we do it for the long term viewpoint to plan for what's coming. But I think every day we're using workforce analytics. This goes to what Tyler was just saying. We're using workforce analytics to inform us that, holy moly, COVID hit. Nobody's telling us they're out with COVID. Let us pull all our data on employee leaves. Let us pull our medical information to go. If we don't get at this soon, our advocacy team is going to shut down. What do we need to do? We take our pulse data when we're going through interesting times in our company to go, what's our employee sentiment around things that are going on, whether it be COVID, whether it be company changes, to be able to look at employee sentiment, understand where their hot spots, use analytics to break out demographics to go, how do we go in and get personal and do focus groups with this group of people, whether it be a region, whether it be a demographic. So I would say the expansion of workforce strategy is just not about looking out. It's about today and taking that personal insight for managers. This is where it goes back to a manager with a team. Like, do you understand that half your employees are not happy today and they need to do something different? So I'd say we have the long-term plan for it. Where we use it every day in every way. And when we have a hot spot from a macro condition hit, or if there's something going on in the company, because of who we are, our employees are not afraid to take a survey, give us information. And we use all that to solve for an individual situation, for the business, for our customers, and for our employees.
Yeah, absolutely, Michelle. And I think so you've alluded to how one way in which we can use sort of the data that we're collecting to understand employee motivation and understand what we can be doing as a business to address motivational issues that are arising. I guess another area that I'd be keen to explore is, so one aspect of it is motivation. Another aspect of it is that just in the context of COVID and as we're coming out of COVID and we're recovering, a lot of it is, yes, motivation is the factor that we need to be addressing. But another part of it is the fact that the way in which people want to work is also now beginning to change. So we have
Absolutely.
this massive growth in the contingent workforce, right? Michelle, maybe just sticking to you, what are your thoughts on that? How do we sort of address that challenge? A, is it a challenge for businesses? And B, how do we address that through analytics?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. And I think when you think about Zendesk, 6,000 employees around the world, when you think about we serve 155,000 customers, small potatoes compared to some of the others. But I would say there's two things that are always important to us. One is the word contingent workforce is real, but I think we think about it differently. We will always have a body of talent and skills around the world that we know we can tap into if we get maxed out. It is a supply and demand for us at certain times to understand if we pick up and we need extra, where do we go? I think we might talk about it a little bit different. We may talk about the gig workers, we may talk about patch workers. So those folks, we always have this kind of ecosystem of knowing where to reach out to talent that can help cover gaps for us. That's an important piece of it. And it will always have to be, because today's workforce is determining where they want to work and when they want to work. They want flexibility and they want choice. So because of the diversity in that, because we are remote, we just have an ecosystem of talent full time, and we have an ecosystem of gig and patch workers that we bring in, and partners that also help us solve for our customer. So I do think it's a very different viewpoint. I was in manufacturing at one point in my life, and absolutely we had a contingent workforce or other companies. So again, as life evolves and depending on the discipline that you're in, I think contingency workers are very different and necessary, but they may be called something different today. Gig, patch, contingent.
Yeah, absolutely. Nellie, maybe just coming to you next and building on what Michelle has been saying. So previously we were talking a lot about strategic workforce planning. Where would you say sort of contingent workers feed within that? And how can businesses plan for what that might mean for them in the next year, in the next coming years, and so on?
Yeah, I think to answer that question, I want to point back to something that Michelle said that is uh, really telling where the world is at today, is that titles are changing. Like contingent worker are not called gig worker. They might call just workers in the future. Like titles at the very top or the bottom of a conversation are changing. Today, when we see the turnover, we all feel we are gig workers. We all in the capacity to take a job for a few months or to, unfortunately, being part of a big layoff. So we all have that ability, and the power is both in the hands of an employer and an employee to stay as long or as little in the company that we want. So somehow the new generation, the Gen Z, they are taking that big worker that used to be maybe somewhat coming with a little of a negative stereotype, like compared to a full-time employee, and now taking that power back and be like, no, this is my choice to stay. Like I might have signed a full-time contract or a gig, but it's my choice to stay, or it's my choice to give the best to the company. So really, there's a mind shift happening. What is really interesting to what Tyler was saying also is that business analytics are also changing. They need to evolve. So we've seen new data coming out during the pandemic that we never really looked at before. The employer-employee disconnect. We were looking at burnout, but now it was more like, what would you prioritize in staying or taking a new job? Is it the salary? Is it the wellness? Is it the mission? Like, those are all new data that we're looking at, and there will be new coming up. So something that I want to share with the crowd, because that was very interesting. In the last few weeks, one of my pieces was published in Fast Company, where I was sharing that I work with company and we created this index called the Passion Index. Because if people are passionate, they will produce productivity, they will produce high value, they will bring innovation to the company. And post that article, Deloitte, the company Deloitte, approached me because they've been working on a different index, which is a trust index, but with that same mindset that instead of measuring productivity, we should look at what lead to productivity. Passion, you talked about motivation, trust. Those are some critical assets that will lead people to being productive. So looking at higher in the chain to see how we can help workers, contingent, gig, full-time, really deliver, as Tyler said, what we need for the product, the final product.
That's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that, Nellie. And I think it goes back to some of the points that Joanne and Tyler were raising as well, around the need to understand employee motivation, what drives that, but then also working backwards from output and how do we sort of square that circle between motivation and output. So that's a really interesting example. Thank you for sharing that. Ali, maybe if I could come to you next, sticking to the theme of contingent workers. But is that a challenge that you're also starting to see emerge at a company like Unilever? And does that make workforce planning more difficult?
Yeah. So first of all, I really agree with what Michelle said before about continuous monitoring of the situation, and workforce planning cannot be a once a year, twice a year type of analysis. And I think I would say there's three levels where contingent worker can be used in business today. One is kind of simple demand supply that was alluded before. And so, especially manufacturing and distribution, making sure that if we have peak seasons or if we have instant drops due to mass resignation and stuff, we can quickly put a stopgap in place. Obviously, never ideal because you really, contingent worker are skilled workers and knowledge-based workers. So, bringing them up to speed, bringing new people up to speed, even on a production line, is not that easy. So nobody should make the mistake of treating a contingent worker as, transactional. The second level, I think, is about skills that we don't have, but we don't think we need. So if we have need of certain skills at that specific moment in time that you want to bring in, but you don't want those skills to become part of your core. And the third one is skills that you don't have, but they will be part of your core. And so, how do you bring them in? Maybe you start bringing some contingent worker in and start distributing the knowledge. And that, of course, influences workforce planning, especially when workforce planning wants to address, both your base and contingent workers. But again, is really related to, has to be connected with your business plans, because otherwise, the two things, progress on different levels, and you won't, if you don't do that, workforce planning won't give you value. But again, super important, the point that Michelle made before, is not a one-off exercise, is something that needs to be monitored and refreshed almost on a daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely, Ali. And Joanne, actually, what Ali was just talking about goes back to one of your earlier points about the fact that it all comes down to your strategy. Workforce planning needs to serve that strategy rather than the other way around. But I actually wanted to come back to you as well, Joanne, on the topic of contingent workers, because you were talking a lot earlier about the importance of motivation. And I wanted to understand from you what role you think that plays when you have a growing contingent workforce. Is that still equally important? Or are there other things that you need to be considering when it comes to workforce planning?
Well, so I think motivation is important no matter for all workers, right? I think Nellie just mentioned the passion index. I think all organizations are trying to understand motivation because we get the best out of our workers when they're motivated, when they feel connected to the mission and that they understand how their work connects to something greater. Whether they're a gig worker, a contingent worker, a full-time worker, I think all of that is very important because people want to feel that they're contributing to something larger. And so, and I agree with all the comments about contingent workers. I think they're, in our case, they're mostly very highly skilled workers that we bring in for very specific projects and needs when, quite frankly, it's very hard to find full-time workers with those skills, right? And they have, to Nellie's point, they have more power now than they've ever had before, right? And so I think we have to really revise the mental model and make sure that those workers are equally excited to come to work with us and our teams. And so motivation is important. And I think we have to make sure that we treat them as part of the teams that they're part of so that they don't feel other. We can bring in, to Ali's point, a team of gig workers or contingent workers to help with a project. Or more often than not, we're bringing in a few at a time to add to a team to bring in a skill set. And I think it's really important that from a motivational perspective, they feel part of the team. Oftentimes when we bring in a gig worker that has a specialized skill, we're exposing the rest of the team to that skill set. which also begins to bring excitement to the rest of the team. I think Michelle began to touch on this a little bit, right? Which is very interesting dynamic because it's almost the yin and the yang of employee culture, expanding the skill sets, I hope, both ways. Because the gig worker gets to learn about our culture, our processes, our business, and then the team gets to learn about the skill sets that the gig worker is bringing in, right? So it's kind of this mutual learning environment that I think is really when things are working at their best. When we begin to treat each other like other, I think that's when motivation goes way down. The gig worker doesn't want to come back. Then Michelle gets a call or Nellie gets a call, right? It's not a good thing. And then it's not. So I think motivation is huge. I think it's challenging though for when we're talking about benefits or we're talking about other things that I think we're still trying to work out on the playing field, right? We do things at MasterCard for our full-time employees that we have work from anywhere weeks, right? That we can offer our full-time workers that we could offer the contingent worker, but it's not exactly the same thing, right? So how do we square those things up? I think we're all still in a moment of transition, I would say, as a workforce, that many organizations are still trying to figure out the model to make that easy. But the day in and day out type of benefits of, I don't know, we're handing out ice cream on a Wednesday. Well, certainly everybody gets that, right? There's no like show your employee ID card or anything like that. But I think the larger benefits, those are those are still sometimes bumpy.
Give us a call if you need ice cream, Joanne.
I will. That's a great idea. I will, Ollie.
Love it.
I love it.
And that's such a great perspective, Joanne. Of course, like you said, there are things that still need to be worked out in terms of how we manage this growth of the contingent workforce, but there's a huge opportunity at hand as well, like you alluded to. And I think that is something for all businesses to kind of embrace that opportunity that comes with this growth. So we are actually coming to the end of our discussion, and I think we've touched upon a lot of different challenges with workforce planning, but also how analytics and just general workforce planning and strategic planning can help address these. Just to wrap up, I wanted to just go around the panel and ask each of you to just, in 30 seconds, give us what you think will be the most important aspect for businesses to consider as they now start to build their talent pools and plan for their workforce. So maybe Tyler, if I could come to you first.
All right, 30 seconds to change the world. Here we go. I think kind of going to this concept of the contingent worker and applying that broadly across your company, the idea of a nimble workforce that can sort of adjust and move at the speed of your business and sort of focus on the most important initiatives is going to be increasingly more critical for companies. And we have sort of a traditional view of onboarding and learning and development as sort of this thing that takes a year and a half. But how can you get people up and running in a role very quickly and productive? I think there's a huge role for analytics, talent analytics to play in there, and for HR. And there's a lot of work to do there that I think we'll need in order to take advantage of strategic workforce planning. Because you can have a plan, but if you can't do anything about it, then what good is it?
Very true. Joanne, coming to you next.
I think we have to be ready for this hybrid world that we're living in, and that we need to figure out how to translate what was an in-person culture to the hybrid world and do that in a way that's mindful that we will use talent analytics, as I call it, talent analytics to get us there, but that to some of the points that were made earlier, that we're still talking about people and that we still need to take that variety, that wonderful variety, into consideration as we execute against that. And so only by doing that do I think we're going to build the kind of culture that all workers are going to want as we evolve the workplace and into the future. But data literacy will be part of that, for sure.
Absolutely. Ali, coming to you for your final thoughts.
Yeah, just 3 thoughts to summarize. first connect workforce planning with your business plans and your transformation plan. Second, make sure that you follow up throughout the year. Third, remember that managing people is art and science. And so whilst the analytics can give you the skills, you need to make sure that you bring in people that fit with the company culture that you want to create.
Thanks, Ali. I think that was a great summary of everything that we've discussed today. Michelle, just coming to you next.
Yeah, I think the way I would describe it for our leaders right now is that the data allows us to understand, the talent analytics allows us to understand, where people are and what they're doing, depending on where you are. But what becomes more important is what you do with that data. And what we say in this digital first way that we work, we have some principles. We say, great work happens anywhere. So do you know where your people are? Your analytics tells you that. We talk about being together apart and creating communities. No matter what function you're in, we don't care. If you're in a region, bring people together to create the heart at work. And never forget, regardless of where you are, that people drive where we're going. And it's through analytics that help us get even better at following those masses, following those skills so that we can continue to deliver to our customers. Our employees are our number one in the SaaS business.
Thank you, Michelle. I think that's a really, really important point to reiterate. So thank you for that. And finally, last but not least, Nelly, just for your final thoughts.
Not easy to be the last one. There's been amazing things that have been shared, but I think really for me, what I see is that there will always be trends, influences that are needed to be incorporated into the corporation. So Tyler said the fast pace now, and it's really happening. Employees are familiar with joining Web3 communities or even crypto communities where there's no onboarding. You just jump right in and you learn on the go, and it goes much faster than the traditional model that we had when you had to be an intern or a junior to someone for many, many months before you could be responsible for any task. So now the workforce is really changing and they want that fast pace. They want to be empowered quicker. And they're doing it outside of the corporation. So how can companies learn that and understand that this is how people are coming in, what they're bringing in? Also, there would always be influences and influencers inside a company. So understanding the power of these people can really, really be leveraged to continue creating that culture that keep and attract talents. But to Michel's point, we need that backbone of analysis. People will move faster than any analysis we can make of them. Having that backbone that gives us insight on the day-to-day and in the long-term plan will allow us to balance whatever is a trend or whatever is a fundamental shift in how we work.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Nelly, and all of you. That was incredibly insightful. And I think lots that businesses need to be thinking about as they navigate the future for work. Just to say, Ali, Joanne, Tyler, Michelle, and Nelly, thank you so much for joining me today and for taking the time out of your days. And thank you so much to everyone listening at home as well. Bye.